Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Felicity White. I'm the Director of Admissions here at the Health Science Center, Fort Worth. This afternoon, we're here to talk about our PA Studies program and the application process for that program. So hopefully you're all in the right spot. Before we jump into the presentation, just a couple of kind of housekeeping things. So our goal with this webinar is to answer all of the questions that you have about successfully making an application to the PA Studies program. To that end, we really encourage you to ask questions. You'll see in your GoToWebinar control panel that there's an area marked questions. At any time during the presentation, if something comes up, feel free to submit a question. On the webinar with me is Pam Pleasant from the Office of Admissions. So as I'm going through our prepared information, Pam will be kind of behind the scenes responding to questions. So don't wait to submit those. Pam will respond. There'll be some questions that it will be helpful for the entire audience to hear the answer to. And so some of those questions Pam will leave for me to field at the end of the presentation. But definitely submit questions as they come up. That'll make this whole experience more helpful for you and for everyone else too, because sometimes people don't know what they should be asking questions about. So hopefully our presentation will answer some of the questions that you've come with this afternoon. We're going to touch on eligibility requirements for the program, our application requirements, what you need to submit to the program, and then where we'll spend most of our time this afternoon are talking about the selection factors that the faculty consider and strategies for making sure that you're building a strong application, that you'll be a competitive applicant for the program. So we'll dive right in. I have seen a few more people have logged into the webinar since we started there. And I encourage you, those of you who just logged in, if at any point during the presentation you have questions, use the question area in this GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions to us. We'll be responding to those throughout the presentation, and we'll leave time at the end of the presentation for more Q&A. So we'll jump into eligibility. I want to make sure that I go over this clearly. I'm always shocked by how many people submit applications to the program each year who do not meet the eligibility requirements. So I do just want to stress that there are absolutely no exceptions to these eligibility requirements. As an applicant, you have to meet these requirements if you want to be considered for admission into the program. So these are set in stone. There are no exceptions to these couple of eligibility requirements. So the first one is that you do have to have a bachelor's degree from a regionally accredited college or university in the United States prior to matriculation into the PA program. So it's got to be regionally accredited, has to be a US college or university. We don't require any particular major. It is very common for people to apply to the PA program before they have graduated with their undergrad degree, and that's completely fine. It's very common for people to apply to the program this summer between their junior and senior year. What you'll need to do is on your application, indicate to us where and when you'll be completing your degree, which degree you'll be completing, and then if we're able to make you an offer of admission into the program, it will be contingent on you actually following through and completing that degree. So got to have that undergraduate degree in order to be eligible. You must have a minimum overall GPA of a 3.0 as calculated by CASPA. So CASPA is the application service that we use. They have an excellent FAQ on their website about exactly how they calculate overall GPA. So if you have questions about that, go ahead and look at CASPA's information. It's very helpful. But that 3.0 is a firm requirement. So if a candidate applied to the program and they had a 2.99 overall GPA as calculated by CASPA, that applicant would not be eligible for admission into the program. So make sure you're mindful of your CASPA GPA. And then we have a list of required prerequisite courses, and I'll go over those on an upcoming slide. But in order to be eligible for admission into the program, you do have to satisfy all of the prerequisite requirements by December 31st of the year that you're applying to the program. So that does mean you can apply and have some of the prerequisites still in progress or planned for a future semester. but you have to indicate to us on your application which classes you'll be completing to satisfy the prerequisite requirements. And then again, if you're offered admission into the program, it would be contingent on you satisfying those prerequisite courses by the December 31st deadline. So I would encourage you, you do need to make sure that your CASPA application shows us which classes you have planned or in progress, and you need to indicate that those courses are being used to satisfy a prerequisite requirement. There are no waivers or exceptions for the prerequisite requirements. You do have to pass each prerequisite class with a grade of C or higher if it's being scored with letter grades. Pass, fail, satisfactory grades and prerequisites are fine. I guess not fail grades, grades of pass or grades of satisfactory, or credit showing on your transcript for prerequisite classes, that's completely fine. So if there's not a letter grade, it won't be factored into your GPA, obviously, but you can use satisfactory credit to fulfill prerequisite requirements. I know many of you who are enrolled in courses this semester are being faced with not receiving letter grades and instead just receiving credit or passing marks. That's completely fine. You can use that to complete your prerequisite classes. If you ever have a question about whether or not a particular class will satisfy one of our requirements, I would encourage you to visit our admissions website. In the section of the admissions page where it goes over the prerequisite requirements, there's a link to an online form where you can submit some of the details of the course to us, and we can review it and let you know if it's going to be suitable to fulfill a prerequisite requirement. So just in that area of our admissions website where it talks about prerequisites, look for the course evaluation request form. Usually we're able to respond to that request within 1 or 2 business days. So if you're in doubt about whether or not a class will fulfill a prerequisite requirement, just use that form and have that peace of mind of having an answer from us. So the prerequisites that you need to satisfy are 3 credit hours of psychology, and this could be any course from the discipline of psychology. It could be general psychology, abnormal, developmental, lifespan, anything from the discipline of psychology will be suitable. 3 credit hours of statistics, and we're pretty flexible about which statistics courses we take. If the word statistics is in the title of the course, it probably is acceptable. It might be a psychology statistics, a business statistics, might be biostatistics. All of those courses are probably fine. But again, just if you question whether or not your course is going to work, use that form on our website and we'll get you a firm answer. And then we're going to get into our science requirements. And so all of the courses that you see listed here with an asterisk at the end, they do have to be intended for science majors. So anatomy and physiology with lab work, organic chemistry with lab work, microbiology with lab work, and then a genetics course. That one doesn't have to have a lab. If it does, that's fine. But they have to be intended for science majors. And when you're looking at the list of required hours, just keep in mind here, we're talking about semester credit hours. So if you attend an institution that uses a quarter-hour system, you would need to convert those hours to semester credit hours to make sure that you're fulfilling the requirement. And then one note with the 8 hours that we require for anatomy and physiology with lab, undergraduate institutions tend to offer their anatomy and physiology coursework one of 2 ways. It's usually either a sequence of ANP1 and ANP2 that equals 8 hours, or it'll be a standalone 4-hour anatomy course with lab and a standalone 4-hour physiology course with lab. Either way is acceptable. You just need to make sure that you're meeting the 8 hours, that lab work was included, and that the course was intended for science majors. So sometimes we'll have students try and fulfill the science classes with courses maybe that were kinesiology courses or nursing courses. Often those are not science major courses, and so if you're considering taking one of those courses or you already have, I would really, really encourage you to use that evaluation request form so we can be sure that the course you're taking meets the requirement. That's our complete list of required prerequisites. If you have questions about that, I see a few more people have been logging in. If you have questions about anything during the presentation, please submit a question through the GoToWebinar control panel there. Pam Pleasant from the Office of Admissions is here on the webinar with me, and she's fielding those questions. So feel free to submit. Once you're sure that you've met the eligibility requirements and you're ready to make your application, there's a few things that you need to keep in mind to make sure that you successfully submit an application to the program. We participate in CASPA, which is the Common Application Service for PA programs. The CASPA is set to open on April the 30th, and you know, even with everything that's going on in the world with COVID-19, CASPA assures us that they plan to open on time and on schedule. So we are planning for an April 30th opening. Because our program offers invitations on a rolling basis, we strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that you apply early in the application cycle. So that means when it opens on April 30th, you're there getting your information input, getting your supporting documents associated with your CASPA. So you've got to have your transcripts sent to them. I believe they are offering some leniency in the transcripts that this cycle they'll be allowing you to submit unofficial transcripts because many registrars' offices are not available right now to submit official transcripts. So they're allowing that, but you'll need to get your transcripts associated with your application, your letters of recommendation associated. CASPA has to receive all of those supporting documents from you before they'll put your application into their verification process. And usually their verification process takes a couple weeks. So as you're planning your timeline, make sure that you get everything submitted early and that you get into that verification queue, because it's our policy that we won't read an application until it's met 3 criteria. The first is that we have received your verified CASPA. The second is that we have received your CASPA test scores. And then the final item is that we've received a $40 application processing fee that you pay directly to the program here at the Health Science Center. So until those 3 criteria are met, your application would be considered incomplete. So think about how you're going to meet those criteria. You may notice, if you had been looking at our application requirements previously, that we are no longer requiring the GRE. So that was a decision that the admissions committee made fairly recently. We had been talking for quite a while about our stance on the GRE. And then in light of everything that's happening in the world with COVID-19 and access to testing centers not being available, we thought it was a good time to reevaluate our GRE requirement, and the faculty has decided to eliminate that requirement. So the GRE is no longer one of our application requirements, but you do have to have a verified CASPA application. You have to submit CASPA test scores. And if you're not familiar with CASPA yet, you'll find links to it on our admissions website, but it is an online situational judgment test. And then that $40 application processing fee. So once we receive all 3 of those, or once you've met all 3 of those standards, then your application goes into our queue to be reviewed. And in the midsummer, usually late June, we start making invitations to interview. We typically conduct interviews on our campus from August to December, sometimes into January. And after we conduct our first round of interviews, we immediately start to make offers into our program, and then we continue to interview and continue to make offers until the class is filled. And for us, that usually happens in December or early January. As of right now, we're not planning for any deadline changes or any timeline changes in our application cycle. Of course, you know, we don't know what the world will look like in a few weeks or a few months. And so if we do make adjustments to any of our timelines, we'll publish those on our admissions website. But as of right now, we're planning to conduct the application cycle as we normally would. So you're sure you meet the eligibility requirements. You know how to successfully submit an application. But what we'll spend most of our time talking about for the rest of the afternoon is how to ensure that you have built a competitive application for the program. So we try to be really, really transparent about what it is we look for in a successful application. And so this is an exhaustive list. These are all of the things that the faculty consider when they're deciding who to invite to an interview and ultimately who to join our program. There are plenty of things that aren't on this list. You don't see things like race or gender or what state you're a resident of, or what color your hair is. None of those things are on this list. Those are not things that we consider in our selection process. What we do consider is academic performance, knowledge of the profession, exposure to healthcare, your letters of reference, your history of volunteerism, your leadership experience, maturity, and your communication skills. Those really are all of the things that we look at. Because the process of applying to PA schools has become so competitive, we know we are turning away many well-qualified candidates every year. We're turning away people who could be excellent students and people who would ultimately be great clinicians. The reality is that we have the resources here at the HSC in Fort Worth to educate 75 students. We have the faculty, the clinical space, the clinical rotations in order to really successfully support 75 students. That doesn't mean that only 75 people who applied to this program were strong candidates. It just means that we have 75 seats. And so as we're talking about how to be outstanding in these different areas and how to build a strong application, we're really talking about more than just convincing the admissions committee that you have academic potential or knowledge of the profession. We're talking about convincing the admissions committee that you're in the top 5 or 10% of people applying to this program in all these different categories. So we'll jump in a little bit more in depth into each one of these areas that the admissions committee looks at. So academics, you can kind of see some targets here, a snapshot of what a typically admitted student's record looks like in terms of their academics. So you can see that their overall GPA, their science GPA, their prerequisite GPAs, the average is all quite high, 3.7, 3.8 for admitted students. You can see the ranges are a little more open, but we're really talking about achieving grades like a 3.3 or higher in order to be in the range of a typically admitted student. And then usually students who are admitted who have GPAs that are lower in the range will have shown us that there's an upward trend in their academic performance. So there'll be recent academic success, and they will have performed at a high level in their prerequisite coursework. It's very rare for us to admit a student into the program who has grades lower than a B in prerequisite classes. The faculty have identified those prerequisite courses as being necessary foundational knowledge to be successful in the curriculum. And so demonstrating to the faculty that you've mastered that foundational knowledge is something that would give them confidence in your academic ability. Being a consistent student is also something that will give the admissions committee confidence. So the students in our PA program, the way that the curriculum is structured, they have to pass every single class successfully, and each of the courses build on the content of courses that came before. And so, students have to be consistently successful in order to move through the PA program. When we see that consistency in an academic record leading up to PA school, that's something that the admissions committee would find very favorable. So things that would be red flags would be a pattern of failing courses or a pattern in your transcript of withdrawing from courses. Just because you can't fail a course and you can't withdraw from a course in PA school. And so if you're critically evaluating your academic performance and you see that you have one of those patterns in your academic record, I would encourage you to find a way in your application materials to explain that. So talk about what happened, how you overcame those challenges, why it won't be a problem going forward. And then with that explanation, what the admissions committee will expect to see, what will actually give them the confidence that you have turned a corner academically, is an upward trend in your performance and recent consistency in your performance. So think about that. But these ranges of GPAs will give you a little bit of guidance into what a competitive academic record looks like for a typically admitted student. We are going to have many more candidates who have academic potential than we have seats in the program for. So once you have shown the admissions committee that you can handle the program academically, all the other things on that list that we just talked about will start to come into play. So knowledge of the profession is an important indicator for the faculty. If you can build an application that is strong enough to be admitted into the PA program, you really could do anything else in medicine. You could go to any other professional school. There are plenty of helping professions out there. So usually when we're looking at the essays in CASPAs, what gets submitted to us is, it often starts with, I want to be a PA because I enjoy helping people. And that's a great start. But the admissions committee wants to know more about why you are intentionally choosing this particular profession. Like I said, if you can get into PA school, you could do anything else in medicine, all of these other helping professions. So the admissions committee wants to be convinced that you're making a really well-informed and intentional choice to pursue this particular profession. The way that you can convince them that you are making that well-informed choice is through exposure to the profession. So it's most commonly demonstrated by admitted students that they have sought out exposure to the profession through shadowing or through working in settings where PAs practice, through writing intelligently about the profession and insightfully about why they are picking this particular profession. So your essay, it would be appropriate for that to reflect on why you made the decision to pursue the PA profession, what is motivating you to pursue this profession, what it is about you and your career goals and your strengths that are really well suited to this particular profession. Answering those types of questions for the admissions committee will give them the confidence that you are making a well-informed, well-reasoned decision. Kind of hand in hand with knowledge of the profession is some experience working in patient care settings. And so, you know, the average admitted student has worked for about 2 years in a part-time capacity in a role where they have some responsibility for the care of a patient. And the most robust experiences will be ones that are in settings where PAs practice. This is going to, again, show the admissions committee that you have had exposure to healthcare, that you've had exposure to the PA profession, but also that you have foundational skills that we can build on for you to become a great clinician, so that you have those interpersonal skills and the emotional intelligence to already be working in a healthcare setting. That will give the admissions committee confidence that you've got skills we can build on. So the most common things that we see our admitted students doing are working as medical assistants or scribes. Sometimes we see students doing, working in positions where they have to have more certifications. So maybe they're working as EMTs, paramedics, nurses. It's pretty common for us to see students who've worked as medical technologists, phlebotomists, or pharmacy technicians. All of those would be good experiences. The most common ones that we see for admitted students, though, are working as medical assistants or scribes. If you have a question about whether or not a particular experience would be valuable, you're always welcome to submit that question to us. We're happy to give you some guidance or advice, but I would strongly encourage you, if you don't already have patient care experience in your background, that you seek out ways to gain that experience. It's something that the admissions committee will certainly value. Letters of recommendation play an important role in the application. This is that unbiased third party who's giving us insight into your potential. I can tell you, I have read all of the letters of recommendation submitted to the program since 2010. I can't do the math in my head about how many thousands and thousands of letters that is, but I can tell you that on just my fingers and toes, I can count the number of negative letters of recommendation I've ever read. Candidates to the program always have positive letters of recommendation. So a positive letter of recommendation doesn't really do anything to make your application stand out because everyone has them. Everyone has a letter that says, so-and-so was in my clinic and we all really enjoyed her, or so-and-so was in my class and he made an A. He was a wonderful student. Because every applicant has that letter in their file, it's not a powerful letter. The letters that are more rare and that stand out and that really support an application are ones that give specific examples about your potential. So it takes a little more work to get those really exceptional letters of recommendation. You have to develop relationships with the people who are going to write these letters. They have to have had enough interaction with you that they do have specific examples that they can comment on. And then you need to give them some instruction about the types of things that would be appropriate for them to reflect on. Most people writing the letters of recommendation, I think, assume that, if I say she was great, that's a great letter of recommendation. But what we really want to see is specific examples about your potential to be a great clinician, your potential to be successful in a fast-paced, science-based graduate program. It would be appropriate for them to reflect on your motivation, your work ethic, on your professionalism, your judgment, your critical thinking skills. It would be appropriate for them to talk about your emotional intelligence and your interpersonal skills, your ability to be part of a team. All of those things are, qualities that we want well developed in students who join our program. And so if your letters of recommendation can give us some insight into your potential in those areas, that will support your application. I often think it should go without saying, but by the submissions that we get, it can't go without saying. We are looking for professional letters of reference, not personal letters of reference. I know that your mother loves you. She cannot write you an unbiased letter of recommendation. So make sure that you're not asking family members or close family friends for letters of recommendation. Those will not be unbiased. And if you submit have a letter of recommendation submitted on your behalf from a family member or someone who is a close personal relationship with you, then that would call into question your judgment. And certainly we don't want that called into question in your application. So make sure that they're professional references. I strongly recommend that at least one of them come from a PA who's had a chance to observe you in a clinical setting. I strongly recommend that at least one letter comes from a professor, especially one who taught you in a science discipline. And then the other letters of recommendation from any other professionals who you've interacted with. So supervisors at work, coordinators of your volunteer experiences, maybe another professor, another PA, another clinician. Those would all be appropriate letters. We require that you have at least 2 letters of recommendation associated with your CASPA. CASPA usually allows either a limit of 4 or 5 letters of recommendation, depending on the application cycle. I would encourage you to use all of the available spots for letters of recommendation. For our program, we will read any letter of recommendation that is associated with your file. Volunteerism and community engagement is important to us. The HSC at Fort Worth is an institution built on shared values, and our strongest shared value among all of our faculty, staff, and students is service to others. And so when a student comes to our program and we can clearly see that they have a heart for service, that they are going to contribute to their classmates, to their program, to the university, to our wider Fort Worth community, that is something that we will respond very positively to. We'll say On the majority of applications that I read, there is some level of volunteerism reflected in the section of the CASPA that calls for you to list your volunteer activities. Usually they're not very impactful experiences, so it might be relaying for life for an hour and picking up trash for an hour and doing a couple other activities for an hour or two here and there. And not to discount those activities, but they are not as powerful as the application that shows I was really passionate about an issue. I saw a need in my community. I took extended long-term action on that need. And then this is the story I can tell you of the impact I made in my community or the impact I made in someone's life. That is much more powerful story to be associated with your volunteerism. And so I would encourage you all, think about the things that you're passionate about. Think about the ways that you actually can make a difference, that you can improve your community, and then go to work doing that and stick with it. That's something that the admissions committee would really respond favorably to. Communication skills are important. I'm sure we can all agree that strong communication skills are foundational for clinicians. You have to have great communication skills to be a great PA. And so we are going to evaluate that in our application process. Where we first look at communication skills is through the written materials that you submit in your application. So make sure that you're giving careful consideration to how you present yourself in your application materials. Make sure that your application is not full of typos, especially in the essay section. Make sure you're using appropriate essay construction and grammar. Make sure that the tone of the application is professional and not too casual. And then where we're really going to look at your interpersonal skills, at your emotional intelligence, at your critical thinking, are through the CASPER situational judgment exam that we're going to require, and then through our interview process. And we do use an MMI process. So it's a multiple mini interview. It's scenario-based interviewing. And those are some of the qualities that we're going to evaluate on that day are your communication skills, your interpersonal skills, your emotional intelligence, and your critical thinking. It's very difficult to practice for MMIs. There's lots of resources online that you can use that will kind of help you be familiar with what an MMI protocol looks like so that you're not thrown off on that day of your professional school interview if you haven't experienced an MMI before. So you can do some research and get some information about that will help you feel more confident. The best advice that I can give you is to do some mock interviewing. Ask the clinicians that you're working with, faculty that you're studying with, family, friends, to help you do some mock interviews. And the reason that those are appropriate or that they're helpful is not because they're going to give you a canned answer that you can use in the MMI, because you won't know what's coming at you for each of those scenarios, and it's hard to have a pre-rehearsed response. But what it will help you with, the mock interviews, is to think on your feet and be able to organize your thoughts quickly and speak confidently. Just having that mock interview experience will help you remain calm and poised under pressure, and that will really help you get your point across in whatever the structure of an interview is for professional school. So I would encourage you all to do some mock interviewing. So that's it. It really is. There's no secret sauce to it. We are only looking at the things that are on this list that we just talked about. If it's not on this list, it's not considered in our selection process. It just really is, it's a competitive applicant pool for a few number of seats in the program. And so it does take a lot of effort on your part as an applicant to be strong in all of the different areas that we look at. And really, to be a successful candidate, you do have to be strong in all these areas. You can't have great academics, but no experience. and vice versa. You can't have great experience, but really concerning academic performance. You do have to be strong in all the different areas that we look at in order to build that successful application to the program. I know that Pam has been answering questions behind the scenes while I've been presenting. We'll go ahead and keep the webinar open for a while longer. I know there's probably some questions that I need to get to that Pam hasn't responded to yet. So feel free to keep submitting questions. I'll read some of those aloud and respond to them so everyone can benefit from hearing the answer. But if you do have questions that come up after we close out the webinar today, please feel free to reach out to us. Right now, the HSC campus in Fort Worth is closed, and so our admissions staff is working remotely. That means the best way to get in touch with us is through email. So paadmissions@unthsc.edu is the best way to get in touch with us. We try to respond to emails within 1 or 2 business days, so you should have a quick response from us, but don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to take a look at some of these questions that have come in. Okay, so due to the pandemic, some of the schools will take additional time to send transcripts. Will my application be looked at prior to all my transcripts being verified? So no, we wouldn't, but the workaround for that is that CASPA is allowing you to submit unofficial transcripts. So you're able to log into your student system and get an unofficial copy of your transcript and send that to CASPA. And then if we make a student an offer of admission into the program and all we can see through CASPA is an unofficial transcript, just prior to matriculation, we would ask for an official transcript to be sent. So that's how we're working around that. How many shadowing hours do we recommend? So we're more concerned with the quality of the exposure that you have to the profession than the quantity. Successful students usually have more than 30 hours and less than 300 hours and anything in between. But what we're more concerned with is the quality. So it's nice if you can demonstrate to the admissions committee that you have had exposure to a few different clinicians who work in different settings, in different specialties with different patient populations, so that they can feel assured that you really have explored the profession broadly. We know now that there are probably going to be more difficulties than before, and it's always been hard to get shadowing hours, but now shadowing hours are going to be really difficult to come by. And so I would encourage you all to be creative in the way that you get some shadowing. Maybe reach out electronically to some clinicians, or watch videos of PAs in practice, and then find a way on your application materials to reflect that you have done that exploration. And having done that exploration, it'll help you write intelligently about your desire to pursue this profession. So I would encourage you, try and be creative in the ways that you seek out that exposure to the profession, and know that we understand that the situation that is facing you right now. Is the CASPER test something that one has to study for beforehand? It's really not. So in all of the presentations that we've had from CASPER, their research shows that studying for the test, which you really can't study for a situational judgment test, but studying for the test doesn't enhance people's scores, and they've done significant research on that. So no, it's not something that you should think that you have to spend a lot of time studying for. They do have a practice exam on their website that you can take, and I would encourage you to take that practice exam just so that you're familiar with the format of the test. Does it look bad if I don't have volunteer hours but have had plenty of direct patient care experience? It doesn't necessarily look bad, but there are going to be candidates who have great patient care experience and volunteerism. And so if there is one area of your application that's lacking, I think you need to explain. And so if for you, the way that you have made an impact in your community is through your work experience, find a way to say that. But what I can tell you is most successful candidates do have patient care experience and volunteer experience in their background. Is a medical mission trip considered volunteerism? It certainly could be, yes. I mean, any experience that you have, you should put in the most appropriate place on the application. But yes, volunteer mission trips are experience that the admissions committee finds favorable. So we have a question here that's about our dual PA Master of Public Health degree option. And so if you have follow-up questions about that, let me know. I'm happy to get you more information. But what I'll say is just basically, we do have a dual degree program here at the HSC in Fort Worth between our PA program and our Master of Public Health. When students are admitted into the PA program, if they have an interest in doing that dual degree, and usually about 10 out of the 75 students that we admit have had an interest in that degree. We've only had the dual degree option for 2 years now. So I would, and especially given what's going on in the world right now, I would expect to see more interest in that dual degree option. But usually when students are admitted into the program, that summer semester before they start PA school, sometimes even the spring semester if they were admitted very early. So that time between when they have a successful application to the program and when PA school starts, they will often start their MPH coursework, which can all be done online. So if you're not local and you're admitted to the program and you want to start on the dual degree, you can do that. Students will get started with the MPH coursework. The first semester of PA school, they'll take a break from the MPH coursework just to really focus on that first semester of PA school, which is all of our students will tell you that it is the most challenging semester of PA school. And then as they're doing well in the PA program and they feel like they can take on a little bit of extra, they'll take MPH courses one at a time. Usually the MPH courses are, like I said, they're offered online and they're offered in 8-week sessions. So students will, they may take a couple of the public health courses during their second year of PA school. A lot of times students will work on MPH coursework during the last year of PA school while they're in their clinical rotations and they have a little bit more time on their hands. Some students will graduate with the dual degree, both degrees completed at the end of their 30 months in PA school, but you do have up to 2 years after PA school ends to complete the remainder of the MPH degree. And a lot of students will choose to do that so they can really focus on PA school while they're doing that. But it's a great option. 12 of the credit hours in the MPH program are fulfilled by courses in the PA curriculum. So it is an accelerated MPH when you do it as the dual degree. But for whoever asked that question, if you have follow-up questions, just email them to us and we may be able to answer them. Otherwise, we'll get you in touch with some of the staff from the School of Public Health. So this is a question about having great patient care experience in settings where PAs practice, but being nervous that due to COVID-19, you won't have a chance to do shadowing. What we want is exposure to the profession. So if you are a candidate who is working or has work experience in settings where PAs practice, we are less likely to need to see shadowing experience to be convinced that you have been exposed to the profession. Vice versa, though, if you're a candidate who has very limited patient care experience or it's not in a setting where a PA practices, then for those candidates, we would be more inclined to need to see shadowing experience to feel confident in your exposure to the profession. So it's a balance. It doesn't matter to us as much where it appears in the application. So if your exposure to PAs is through your work experience, it doesn't also have to be through your shadowing experience. But just make sure when you're writing the synopsis of whatever that experience is, whichever section of the CASPA it appears in, that you're making it obvious that you had exposure to the profession. Do you take into account someone who was a student athlete while pursuing their bachelor's? Certainly. Absolutely, we take into consideration extracurricular activities. So whether that was being a student athlete or working full time on top of studying, what we want to see is that you manage your time well, that you push through stress in an appropriate way, and you're still able to be a successful student. Those are certainly traits that you need to have well developed to be successful in the PA program. So absolutely, we take into consideration your extracurriculars and the impact that that has had. Encourage you to make sure that you, whatever those extracurriculars are, whether it's athletics or work experience, volunteer experience, make sure it's really well reflected in your application so we know what you were dedicating your time to. And we can see that you were able to manage your time well because you did have all these extracurricular responsibilities. Okay, this is a question. So someone is saying that CASPA told them they're not allowed to submit unofficial transcripts. We'll have to follow up on that. We were in a webinar with CASPA yesterday that said that they would be accepting unofficial transcripts. So we'll follow up and make sure that that really is true. But we did have a webinar with them yesterday that gave us the heads up on that. So this is someone asking about experience working as a physical therapist, and will that count as direct patient care hours? Certainly. A question here about whether it's appropriate to put shadowing hours with physicians on the application. Absolutely. Include all of your exposure to healthcare and to other clinicians, but what we're going to be most interested in is that you've had exposure to medicine and healthcare, but why in particular are you selecting the PA profession? And exposure to the PA profession, letters of recommendation from PAs are going to be the most compelling thing to convince us that you have the exposure and that you're making that well-informed decision. But certainly include recommendations from other clinicians and exposure that you've had to healthcare outside of the PA profession. So here's a question. Can speaking and interviewing a PA virtually because of the pandemic be considered as shadowing hours? I can't answer that question for all programs, but for our program, absolutely yes, you could include that as shadowing. Would working as a physical therapy tech be valuable patient care experience? Yep, absolutely. You know, probably working as a PT tech is not going to be in a setting where a PA practices. It might be, but probably not. So if that is the bulk of your patient care experience, I would encourage you to have some shadowing, some exposure to the PA profession. So what advice would you give to someone who is struggling with the decision about whether to apply this cycle or waiting to the next cycle? I would, I know the world looks different right now, but I would give you the same advice that I usually give. Apply when you have built your strongest application. So when you feel like you have built your strongest application to the program, that's when you apply. There's no penalty for taking a gap year or for having spent time building a stronger application. It usually does nothing but work in your favor. So don't worry about it for that reason. When you're ready to submit that application, hope for the best. Hope that your first application is successful, but know that almost 30% of the students that we see into our program every year are students who had to make more than one application before they were successful at gaining admission, just because of how competitive this process is. There's a question here about the timing for taking the Casper test. So if you go to our admissions webpage, there's a link to our Casper test dates. The deadline to have Casper submitted is September the 24th. That's the final test date that you can take. But it's in your best interest to do that earlier in the application cycle. And they have test dates opening up as early as May. You don't go to a testing center to take the CASPER, you take it from your home. They have a list of technology requirements, but you take it remotely, and the earliest you can take it is in May. So start looking into that. Would it help to have a letter of recommendation from an alumni? Well, I mean, we certainly value our alumni, but it would not be any more powerful than a letter from any other PA. How does one become an educator at a PA program? That's an interesting question. It's not one that we usually get. Most of the faculty members in our program have practiced as PAs for 5 to 10 years prior to becoming educators, and then they usually will have a terminal degree. So they'll get a PhD or a Doctor of Health Science, a Doctor of Education, something of that nature, before they join the program as an educator. And then oftentimes kind of the gateway to becoming a faculty member is first they'll start working, while they're clinicians, they'll start working as preceptors for students who are on their clinical rotations, and then they might come to the program as a guest lecturer on a particular topic, and then they'll kind of be recruited into becoming full-time faculty members. The number of faculty members that any program can attract is one of the limiting factors. So I don't know if you know this about PAs, but PAs really like being PAs. And so it's hard to get them out of the clinic and into the classroom because they do have a lot of job satisfaction. So you can always be assured, you know, when you're working with your faculty, that they want to be in the classroom because they absolutely have, you know, 10 job offers to do clinical work. There's quite a few questions still coming in. I'm going to get through as many as I can before we come up on the 3 o'clock hour and we have to sign out. If we don't get to your question today, please feel free to email it to us. So paadmissions@unthsc.edu, and we'll be able to field those. There's a little bigger audience on the webinar today than we usually have, so I apologize if we can't get through all the questions. What are some of the don'ts for the essay? Oh, that's a good question. So some of the don'ts for the essay. Don't put an apostrophe in the profession that you want to be a part of. It's physician assistant, not physician's assistant. That's a big pet peeve for one of our faculty members. So know the title of the profession that you want to join. You know, you don't want your language to be too casual. You want your essay to be in your voice, but err on the professional side of your voice. And then my one big don't is don't stop before the essay is done. So usually, like I said earlier, the essay will have some kind of theme along the lines of, I want to be a PA because I like helping people. There are so many helping professions. There are so many other ways that you could help than being a PA. So you need to take the essay that one step farther and tell us why in particular you're pursuing this profession. What has made you passionate about this? Even if it's practical reasons, what are the practical reasons that you're pursuing this profession? So take it that step farther and tell us why, beyond just that you like helping people. What's the best recommendation for a gap year given the COVID-19 situation? That's an interesting question. So I would tell you, try to really critically evaluate where your application stands right now. It's hard to do. And like we said, I said earlier, we're not just talking about convincing the admissions committee that you're a strong candidate in the areas that we look at. We're talking about being in the top 5 or 10% of the applicants to the program in those areas. So really do a self-appraisal of your application and where it stands. Identify where your weaknesses are in comparison to successful applicants. And then develop a plan to address whatever those weaknesses are. So if it's academics, repeat any prerequisite courses that you didn't perform strongly in, or take additional high-level science courses and perform well in them. If the weakness in your application as compared to successful students is your experience, find ways to gain that experience. So, a position working in a healthcare setting, practice your interview skills, work on developing those relationships with people who are going to write your letters of recommendation. Basically, just go through that list of everything that we consider in our selection factors and figure out a way to enhance your application in relation to that. But be strategic and look at your strengths and your weaknesses and really try to come up with a plan to address those weaknesses. Are the interviews strictly MMI, or are we given an opportunity to learn more about the program? Absolutely. So it's usually the way that we structure it is a half-day event. Part of that half day will be you as a candidate going through the MMI and being assessed by us. The other half of the half day is you getting a chance to assess us. So you'll have Q&A time with faculty, you'll have some private time with our student ambassadors. They're usually second-year students who have volunteered to help with interviews. You'll have a tour of campus with those student ambassadors. So you absolutely do get a chance to learn more about us on the interview day. It's our goal after the interview day that, if you are our top choice, we also want to be your top choice. And then when we make the offer of admission, you accept it and we're done. And that would be great. So I was working full time while getting my undergrad in biology. Some of the grades were not ideal. Would you recommend retaking any of them, even if they weren't a prereq? So I would start with the prerequisites. Make sure that you have as strong a performance as possible in all of the prerequisites. And then repeating classes that are not prerequisites, we probably wouldn't recommend, but I would tell you if what you're trying to do is enhancing your academic record, take some additional higher level rigorous science courses and do well in them. And those could be at the undergraduate or even graduate level. Do you value a letter from a PA in a particular specialty? I guess, no, we don't really dig into it that deeply. Our program certainly values family medicine and general practice, but letters from PAs in all kinds of specialties can still be powerful with your application. And only about half of our class graduating every year goes into family medicine or some kind of more general practice. The other half go into a really wide variety of specialties. Okay, so it looks like we're coming right up on the 3 o'clock hour. I see that I still got a list of questions here, but we're going to go ahead and close out the webinar. If I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry, but we would be happy to respond to it. So please just send that question over to us at paadmissions@unthsc.edu. And then if you need to refer back to this presentation, the recording will get published on our website sometime over the weekend. So next week you'll be able to refer back to it. So I look forward to seeing any additional questions that come through via email, and then we look forward to seeing you apply to the program. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us.